So Sarah, this should be, I mean, this is going to be a Welcome, everyone, to the first of 4 Blade Now Wet post-election chats being streamed online both in DC and LA. I'm Chris Johnson, the White House reporter for the Washington Blade, the only LGBTQ news outlet in the White House press corps. And today we are pleased to talk to the venerable Sarah McBride, fresh from her victory in Delaware, winning a seat in the first district and for a Delaware State Senate. And so thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to see you.
And so, I mean, the focus of this video chat is going to be on the LGBTQ winners that we saw, the historic winners that we saw in the 2020 election. Sarah is the first openly transgender person elected to a seat in the state Senate in U.S. history. And hopefully joining us very shortly is going to be Ritchie Torres, who won a congressional race in New York and the Bronx. And he is one of 2 of the first openly gay Black men elected to Congress. So there was a lot of victories for the LGBT community in election 2020. And I'm pleased to talk to Sarah about her win. I guess to start off with, can you just tell me a little bit about like the moment of victory on election day? Like, how did you find out that you, in fact, were going to get that seat?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's really special for the reasons that I'm about to tell you. So I had spent all of election day at different polling locations throughout the first Senate district, which for folks who aren't familiar with Delaware includes parts of the city of Wilmington, our largest city, as well as the communities of Edgemoor, Bellefonte, and Claymont, which is right at the Pennsylvania state line. It's the community that Joe Biden's family moved to when they moved here from Scranton, Pennsylvania. And so I had spent all election day visiting and greeting voters at various polling locations. The final polling location that I was at on election day was my old middle school and high school, Cab Calloway School of the Arts. So we closed the day out there, and after polls closed at 8 p.m., I jumped into the car with a friend to head to what we hoped would be our victory party. And as we're driving there, I'm refreshing the Department of Elections webpage over and over again, waiting for any kind of results to come in. And about 15 minutes after the polls closed, after maybe my 40 or 50th refresh press, the absentee ballot results came in, which for this election was about 30 to 40% of the overall vote. And we won the absentee vote with about 86% of those votes, which meant that I would have to do very, 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 very poorly in the election day vote in order for me not to at least get 50+1. So that was the moment that it started to sink in that I was going to win, that our campaign was going to win. And perfectly, within about 30 seconds of those numbers appearing on my screen, my phone started vibrating with a call from Danica Roem, who was clearly also feverishly refreshing the Department of Elections Delaware webpage. And she called and I picked up, and she was the first person to congratulate me, which was so fitting that the person, one of the people whose shoulders I stand on in this victory, was the first person to call to congratulate me. And she has been so generous and so supportive throughout this process and this journey for me. I'm just so incredibly grateful for her. She is the epitome of a trailblazer, because it's the job of someone who's a first to make sure that they're not the last. And she has done that in so many different ways, and I'm proud to be one of the beneficiaries of her legacy.
And I think that call really demonstrates the importance of your win to the LGBT community and the transgender community specifically, because it's only been very recently that we've seen openly transgender politicians being able to win elections in a big way. As of right now, we have I believe it is 4 openly trans legislatures, and then with the election 2020, in your election, as well as the election of 2 others, it'll be up to 7 next year. You can correct me on my math if I'm wrong about that. I think that's right, isn't it?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of curious, like with this bunch, this group of 7, like is there like some sort of club? Like how much interaction do you guys have? Is there some sort of like listserv you're on or something, or like how often are you guys in communication?
We do have a DM thread on Twitter that Danica actually started as the den mother of the trans legislator caucus. So we do have a DM message thread there. And again, Danica has just been so incredibly nurturing, I think, to all of us. I had the pleasure of a Zoom coffee with her to celebrate about a week ago, which was so great to get her advice, to get her thoughts, to just commiserate with her in the best possible way. So yeah, we're on a DM thread. And I think what's so great is that I think all of us are celebrating one another. All of us have had the pleasure of serving on panels and programs together over the last, not just 2 weeks, but several months. So it's a great group of people, a great group of legislators who understand first and foremost that the only way we can ensure that there's more of us is to do the best job we can for the residents of our respective districts. And that's certainly how Danica's approached her work. And I know it's how other legislators have approached their work. And it's going to be how I approach my work moving forward too.
That's one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I'm just really curious. I mean, your constituents, how much do you think that the vote for you is representing their desire to break a barrier to elect the first openly transgender state senator? And how much is it that they just really just want you to bring home the bacon at the end of the day? They want you to make sure that the budget is passed and the state services are running on time. What's your sense from your constituents on that issue?
Well, I think what is clear from the results and what was clear to me throughout this campaign is that voters were judging candidates based on their ideas and their experiences, not based on their identities. My gender identity was something that never came up in conversations with voters on my end, and very rarely came up in conversations with voters on the voters' end. And in those few instances where my gender identity was a topic of discussion, a small number of them were voters with genuinely earnest questions. They maybe had read an article and maybe had some questions, very good faith questions. Each one of those instances, I can tell you the voter who brought up those questions, I'm fairly confident ended up voting for me, right? It's to show you just how good faith those questions were. But then more frequently, the few instances where my gender identity came up, more frequently, it was people who were just truly excited about more diversity in government. About the message that their vote could send. And that's the really important thing, is that the messages that our victories send, it's not a message that's sent by us as the candidates or the elected officials. It's sent by the voters, right? It is that the message to trans young people, that is a message that in my case was sent by 16,000 voters throughout the 1st Senate district. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. And that fact that these voters recognize that with their vote in the state Senate race, they could send an important message, they could break a barrier, and they could have more diversity around the table in government, because we know that we can't craft effective solutions to the challenges that we face for diverse communities if we don't have the full diversity of those communities represented in the conversations. That's true in business and technology, and it's certainly true in government and public policy. And so voters were certainly excited, but they were really looking at my ideas and my experiences. And to your question, they aren't just looking for a legislator who can competently balance the budget, as critical as that is. They were looking, and I think responded to the message that we put forward, which was that we have a historic and unique responsibility in this moment amidst this crisis to deliver meaningful results, long-term change for the residents of this district on a whole host of issues, from education to the need to pass paid family and medical leave, to the opportunity to reimagine our criminal justice system. And I think they responded to that message.
I also wanted to ask you about LGBT issues in Delaware. I think a lot of people will be probably seeing you as the point person for LGBTQ legislation, especially given your past work for the Human Rights Campaign. And I'm just wondering, on that front specifically, what more is there for Delaware to do? I mean, Delaware has done quite a bit. You were very active with in getting the transgender non-discrimination law passed to update Delaware state law to include make it trans inclusive with the late Beau Biden. And I just want to know, so now that you're in the state Senate, in terms of LGBTQ issues, where do you see the state going?
So we have made significant progress here in Delaware, but there's obviously a lot more work to do. And I'm proud to join a body filled with many allies who are already doing exceptional work in the fight for LGBTQ equality. And I look forward to supporting their work. You know, I think that obviously given my background, my previous work, legislators will be looking to me for my thoughts and my guidance on these issues. But I look forward to supporting them in their work, them and their leadership. I think there's a handful of issues that we need to tackle for the LGBTQ community. I think first and foremost here in Delaware, we need to make sure that every child can access a safe and quality education, regardless of their zip code, regardless of their race, and regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. I think that is a critical area of life where we have not made nearly the progress that we need to make in. I think also we need to make sure that we're expanding access to affordable healthcare that includes the diverse range of needs of the LGBTQ community. We need to reimagine our criminal justice system and our community safety policies so that LGBTQ people are more fully protected and safer in our communities. We need to make sure that we meet our progress on legal equality with true lived equality. We know that LGBTQ people are more likely to live in poverty, which is one of the reasons why we need to increase the minimum wage. We know that LGBTQ people are disproportionately likely to lack access to life-saving benefits like paid family and medical leave. And that's one of the reasons why we need to pass paid family and medical leave. And so while there's certainly more work to do in the area of LGBTQ equality on strict legal equality around sexual orientation and gender identity, we also need to make sure that we recognize that LGBTQ people have a diverse range of needs that include the same kinds of needs that other Americans, other residents of Delaware have in the economy and healthcare and education, in the criminal justice system. And they may be heightened, but when we address those systemic issues, we should do so with LGBTQ people in mind. And that's actually one of the things I'm super excited about. We had at a Starbucks down on Route 40, the first LGBTQ caucus meeting of Delaware legislators. Delaware is one of those states that up until 2020 had never elected an openly LGBTQ candidate to the General Assembly. And fortunately this year we elected 3, myself included. And Senator Marie Pinckney, Representative Eric Morrison and I had our first caucus meeting to talk about these issues just the other day. And I think we look forward to helping to inform our colleagues' priorities and perspectives on these issues.
And I mentioned the late Beau Biden, who was, at the forefront in updating Delaware's laws to protect LGBTQ Delawareans. But I would also like to ask you about your relationship with the Biden family, especially because now that Joe Biden just had his fantastic win to the presidency. And can you talk about your relationship, and also if you think we're going to see openly LGBT and T appointees and cabinet members in his administration?
Yeah, so I've had the incredible honor of knowing the Biden family for much of my life. Delaware's a small state, as the saying is here, where everyone's dated, mated, or related. And we are all related to Joe Biden here in Delaware. We are all, as he says, part of the Biden family. And that's true for so many reasons. It's true because we're a small state, but it's also true because our community has been by his side through unimaginable tragedy. Back in the 70s, when he was first elected to the U.S. Senate, when he lost his wife and youngest daughter, the state helped to lift him up through that, helped take care of his boys and raise Beau and Hunter. When he lost a son, we lost a friend and a rising star in our state, Bo. And so we've mourned alongside him. We've gotten to see him up close. We've gotten to see the character and the determination, the passion, and the big-heartedness of Joe Biden and Jill Biden and the whole Biden family. I've seen that in my own life. I've seen the tears in his eyes when we talk about the epidemic of violence against transgender women of color. I've heard the passion in his voice when he talks about the need to pass the Equality Act. And I've seen that big heart when the Biden family responded with nothing but love to my coming out as a transgender person. And I think in many ways, you mentioned Bo's leading role on the transgender rights bill. I think Joe Biden, unlike any other national politician, has embraced not just LGBTQ rights, but trans rights as a central pillar of his work and his passion. LGBTQ equality was a central pillar of the Biden Foundation's work. He was the first national federal politician, not just to endorse marriage equality, but to specifically call trans rights a civil and human rights issue. So he was really ahead of the curve on trans rights. And I think in large part, that's a byproduct of his big heart, but also his desire to keep Bo's legacy alive. I think he looked at Bo's leadership on these issues and particularly after his death, wanted to increase his work and his commitment to trans rights. I'm optimistic that this administration is going to be the most pro-equality. I'm confident that this administration is going to be the most pro-equality administration in our nation's history. I know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are not just going to restore the protections we had under the Obama-Biden administration, but we'll go further. They'll also make sure that we're fighting to pass the Equality Act and doing all they can to see that legislation through. But also, they're going to help write the next chapter of our movement. We talked a bit here in Delaware about the need to meet our progress on legal equality with true lived equality. And I know, and I'm hopeful that this administration will put the resources behind true economic empowerment for the LGBTQ community, the kinds of programs that we need to not just have legal equality, but to really have pathways to opportunity and employment and housing that we need. And I'm hopeful that we will have a record number of LGBTQ people in positions of leadership and appointed to this administration. I'm hopeful, would love to see LGBTQ people at every level of the presidential appointments that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be issuing in the next few months. And I'm very optimistic, knowing how much this new administration values diversity as a strength and a critical part of a healthy and true democracy.
And I think a lot of our viewers are going to be really excited about seeing these appointments come out, because there's a lot more barriers to be broken. Like we haven't seen a woman, LGBTQ woman ambassador ever. We're hoping that there are people who are hoping to get that, and then also breaking barriers with transgender appointees in the federal government. Yeah.
And I'm really optimistic. Rafi Friedman Gerspan said this the other day, that we're going to see more and more non-binary folks appointed to administration positions, including a non-binary. I'm hopeful during this administration, the first non-binary person to be on the White House staff. I hope we see that during the course of this administration, that advancement. So I think there's a lot of excitement that is going to come our way in terms of these appointments, and certainly a flurry of activity on the new administration's part to make sure LGBTQ people have the protections and support and opportunity that we need.
But it seems like as we take all these steps forward, at the same time, there are some steps backward. Are you familiar with the recent homophobic incidents in Rehoboth and Lewis? Blue Moon Drag Queen was called an anti-gay slur on a Facebook post by a former Lewis, Delaware fire captain. An investigation is underway and he's been suspended. What do you think should happen to him? Should he be fired outright?
Well, I've not had the ability to review the situation in terms of his employment, but I did see the news of that post, which was despicable and completely inappropriate. And we have to make clear that here in Delaware there is no room for that kind of prejudice, particularly with those who've been tasked to protect us and serve us. No LGBTQ person in Delaware should fear that because of their sexual orientation and gender identity, that the fire department will come a little bit slower to their house. They should never fear that law enforcement will target them and treat them unfairly. They should never fear, for that matter, that they will receive substandard care. They should never fear discrimination in any form or fashion. And when you see these types of comments, you can't help as an LGBTQ person but wonder, am I as safe as everyone else? Will I get the same emergency services that I might need should an emergency arise? And no one should have to fear that there will be anything but a full effort to serve them and protect them. And so while I haven't had the chance to look at the specifics of this individual's employment status, I was deeply, deeply troubled by the comments, and certainly believe there should be some ramifications for those comments.
I think another issue that individuals in Delaware, and of course, not just the nation, but also the world, is the ongoing coronavirus epidemic. What are you hearing from small business owners in your district about COVID restrictions? Do you think we'll lock down again? And what relief is in the works for small businesses?
Well, Governor Carney put forward new restrictions yesterday that will go into effect on Monday for a number of areas of life, including some small businesses like restaurants. You know, Governor Carney has provided strong and data-driven leadership throughout this pandemic. We were, as a caucus, fortunate enough to be briefed by the governor a few days ago regarding the new restrictions. And he is putting forward, and I know the legislature will act quickly to augment this as well, more resources for particularly small businesses impacted by these types of restrictions. We've got to make sure that we continue that data and science-driven approach to keep the curve, as they say, to flatten it, to protect us and to protect our lives. And we can do it in a way that preserves our economy by making sure we're providing the kinds of grants and loans and funding to small businesses that are struggling through this difficult time. And to make sure that as we do that, we're not just supporting businesses and business owners, but the workers within those businesses. That's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about issues like paid family and medical leave, which I think has been a critical lesson from this crisis. And whether you're dealing with a global health pandemic or an individual health crisis, whether you're dealing with COVID or cancer, no one should have to give up their income in the face of illness. And so I believe that we have to learn the lessons from this moment and make long-lasting change so that we're not just helping business owners and businesses get through this, which we need to do, but that we're also supporting workers through this. So I support that data and science-driven approach. There are certainly concerns, and we have to make sure we're listening to those concerns and doing everything we can to mitigate the damage to small businesses. But at the end of the day, we can't have a healthy economy if we don't take care of our public health. We have to get the virus under control. We have to make sure that we're looking at the data around where the spread is occurring and take appropriate and measured steps to prevent the spread of the virus.
I also wanted to ask you about the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And it seems like that day this year is just more important than ever because we've had specifically more transgender deaths or killings in 2020 than any year was previously recorded. And there was just that data from the FBI that came out this week showing that hate crimes against LGBTQ people and transgender people, there was a elevated reported number of cases. And a transgender woman, as the Washington Blade just reported this week, was just murdered this week in Miami. What is your message to the community about the significance of the Transgender Day of Remembrance?
Well, I think the first message to the community writ large is that as we mark Transgender Day of Remembrance and honor the lives that we've lost to hate-based and hate-influenced violence, that we first and foremost have to remember that these are not merely names or numbers or statistics. These are people who had full lives ahead of them, who were filled with love and joy and laughter, and were worthy of dignity and respect and life. And we can never, ever, ever lose sight of that fact. 2020 was the deadliest year on record. And over the last 5 to 6 years, we have lost well over 130 transgender people to violence. And the only way we can truly honor them and honor this day of remembrance is with action, is to make sure that we are delivering meaningful results as advocates, activists, elected officials, allies, and members of the community on the issues that we need to make progress on. From, of course, passing non-discrimination protections at the city, state, and federal level across the country, to also making sure that we're investing in our communities, particularly communities of color. The toxic combination of transphobia, misogyny, and racism can have deadly consequences. And oftentimes, the violence we see in this epidemic of violence is the byproduct of transgender people, particularly Black transgender women, being pushed out of employment, housing, onto the streets, into underground economies, and out of society's traditional mechanisms for safety and security. And the only way we can address that is to make sure that we meet our passion around LGBTQ rights with an equal fervor for racial justice and immigrant rights and economic justice, for gender equity more broadly. Because all of these issues are linked. As Audre Lorde says, there's no such thing as a single issue cause because no one lives single issue lives. And if we improve conditions based on gender identity, then our Black transgender siblings, particularly Black transgender women, will still face violence because of their gender, because of their race, in many cases because of their economic situation. And so the only way to achieve equality for everyone in our community is to work on all fronts to address issues of inequity, disparities, and prejudice.
The anti-trans violence is certainly an epidemic that is continues to be a problem. But I did want to, as with the coronavirus, those are two major issues. But I did want to end on an elevated note. Sarah, can you tell me, as you prepare to take the reins as a state senator representing the 1st Senate District and the Delaware legislature, is there anything in particular that gives you inspiration, anything that gives you hope?
Absolutely. Here in Delaware, this past November, we elected a historically diverse class of legislators that look like our state, legislators who are people of color. We elected the first practicing Muslim legislator in our state. We elected not just one, but 3 openly LGBTQ legislators, including a transgender woman, a female impersonator, and a Black queer woman. So we didn't just elect a new legislature. We didn't just make one first. We elected a historically diverse class of new legislators that are bringing with them the knowledge that the political is personal and that there is a fierce urgency of now, as Dr. King said. And I think we've seen that across the country in so many ways. The mere fact that our candidacies and our victories are even possible today is a reflection of how far we've come. And it's not enough. It doesn't solve the seemingly intractable issues that we face, but it is a beginning, and it is a step in the right direction. And it is a reflection of the fact that both through legal change and cultural change, we have transformed what once seemed impossible to kids like me growing up, not just into a possibility, but into a reality today. And it is our job to make sure that we make that seemingly impossible change possible on a whole host of issues that we face as a country and as communities. And I am optimistic, I am hopeful that we will do that we will meet this challenge with that diversity, with that hope, with the courage, and with the knowledge that positions of public trust are a unique responsibility for us to do the most good we can for the most number of people we can. And I know that we are rolling up our sleeves already to get that work done, and that leaves me far more hopeful than I've ever been in my entire life.
And I think that serves as a wonderful inspiration for our viewers here, definitely. Sarah McBride, thank you so much for joining us. And look forward to talking to you further more as you are taking on your new role in the Delaware State Senate.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks. Great talking to you.
Thank you.